Call the roller of big cigars, the muscular one, and bid him whip in kitchen cups concupiscent curds. Let the wenches dawdle in such dress as they are used to wear, and let the boys bring flowers in last month's newspapers. Let be finale of seem. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. That's the first stanza of a relatively short poem by Wallace Stevens called The Emperor of Ice Cream. It's a modernist poem, and if you felt simultaneously fascinated by how it sounds, bit and whip and kitchen cups concupiscent curds, and what it was saying, let be finale of seem, and what that all has to do with ice cream, I congratulate you and welcome you to the world of modernism. It's not necessarily an easy world because images can be thrown at you without hierarchy or explanation. Meaning and sound and voice are fragmented, and through this all you have to wade and understand and make meaning. And that's very different from the media that we're consuming nowadays, both visual and literary. For example, a lot of visual media nowadays is relying on over-exposition, over-explanation, simple plots, eye-catching visuals, because 83% of Americans have reported the fact that they're using a second screen. That means that while they're watching a show or a movie, they're using their phone or their iPad and their laptop. And honestly, everybody does that, or 83% of us do. A lot of us do. There's no judgment against that. But what it's resulted in is media falling prey to this simplification of its art. And although sitting down with a book is different than, watching a show or a movie, contemporary literature has also fallen prey to this situation. The plots can be overly simplistic, the language is not particularly complex, you drive right into the conflict, and so modernist literature, like The Emperor of Ice Cream, or maybe if you've ever picked up Faulkner or Virginia Woolf, can feel inordinately difficult and totally alienating because it's precisely engineered to be difficult insofar as it's conveying the difficult reality that the modernists were living in. And even though the modernist period happened about 100 years ago, in this video, I want to tell you why modernist literature is not just kind of relevant for 2026, but eerily similar in its issues, and how in 1919 and in 2026, we are both at a similar precipice, and how we cannot just look into the precipice, look into the abyss, and, feel anxious about the collapse, but do something about it and bridge across to the other side with art, with meaning, with ourselves. And so stick around to the end of the video because I will give you a couple examples of prose poetry, short prose, long prose, that you can read to get into modernism that will help you understand the moment then and the moment now. So let's start with some history so I can give you a little bit more context about the moment then and how it resembles our time now. In A History of Modernism, Vincent Sherry talks about a speech given in 1937 by W.R. Inga during his presidential address at the English Association meeting in London. Dissecting the term modernism, he said, "Modo is not just today or now, but just now. There's an urgency to it which is appropriate for a time of crisis," says Sherry, and then continues to quote Inga, saying, "Turning the uncertainty of instantaneous time into not just a feeling, but an idea, maybe even a faith or belief in this condition of constantly disruptive change." So what caused that change, you may ask? Well, if you notice the period that we're identifying modernism to be aligned with, it happened right around the First World War. And the First World War changed our notion of what war is. Prior to the First World War, there was a sense that a war could be good, it could be justified. There was a romantic notion of a glorious war. And in this glorious war, one could fight. Yes, it was a tragic necessity. Yes, people died. Yes, people got hurt. But there was a sense that you could earn heroism, you can earn fame, you can earn honor, you can be patriotic. And this dates back all the way back to Homer. Think about the Iliad and the Odyssey with Achilles and Odysseus, whose names do end up living into our cultural parlance today. But the thing is that when World War I happened, that all totally collapsed. And that's because the Industrial Revolution and the general industrialization that happened in the mid-late 19th century into the early 20th century led to, a total change in the mechanization and choreography of war. Because although, industrialization brought us the steam engine and things like that, it also brought us tanks and tear gas and the submachine gun. And all of these things led to war not being this, macho man-to-man combat where people, even though they died with honor and glory. People were dying in the trenches. It was horrible, and people didn't know how to deal with that aftermath. And in 1919, 20 million people had died. Everybody had lost somebody. And in that same year, William Butler Yeats wrote a poem called The Second Coming. The Second Coming normally alludes to the biblical second coming of Jesus Christ, which brings with it the idea of hope, of rebirth, of a second chance. But Yeats totally subverts that imagery in this poem. Listen to the first stanza. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. That third line, things fall apart, the center cannot hold, is referred to over and over when we talk about modernism, because it so perfectly encaptures what that moment was like, what everybody was feeling in that moment. And it also encapsulates what people are feeling nowadays and how we feel that our center is not holding. Since the late 19th century, we actually already have philosophy telling us that this industrial revolution and the way that we're living and understanding things is changing, is collapsing, is becoming unstable. For example, in 1899, Sigmund Freud wrote The Interpretation of Dreams, where he talked about the fact that there is a repressed self, repressed desires, repressed thoughts, repressed feelings. And so that this self, which used to be this surest thing that we had in every waking moment, is actually something that we don't really understand. There's a subconscious part of it, and we have to dig at that and interpret it. And we have to face these scary parts of ourselves. And then around the same time, we have Friedrich Nietzsche telling us that God is dead and that we've killed him with science. Now, I want to clarify that Nietzsche is not actually saying that we've murdered a primordial, supernatural being, a god, nor is he saying that we are atheists or ought to be atheists. There's no kind of atheistic thesis here. What he's saying is that Christianity or other religion used to guide us. It used to give us morals and metaphysics and understandings of things. But what's providing that now for us, what's our current religion, is science. And of course, the Industrial Revolution had to accompany that because without industry, there's no science. So we have Freud telling us we don't know ourselves, and we have Nietzsche telling us we don't know good from bad. And then where are we left? What do we do? Well, in the last two lines of The Second Coming, Yeats alludes to Nietzsche in a pretty clear way. He says, "And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born?" What kind of God has this moment birthed? What kind of guiding principles are we left with? And what do we do to face it when we're left totally empty-handed and full of dread, yet with no other option but to move forward? Enter the literary modernists. The modernists, just like everyone else, are left to reel and deal with this moment, and they're thinking, what do we do? Except, of course, they're artists, and what do artists do? They make meaning of the world through their art. And so the modernists, both literary modernists, visual modernists, architectural modernists, all say we have to fundamentally rethink the world. The structures that we had before, the philosophical structures, the psychological structures, the linguistic structures, those don't make any sense anymore. And let me give you an example of one of those linguistic structures that feels like it doesn't belong. So before the modernists, we have the Romantics. Both the Romantics and the Modernists rejected the Enlightenment's idea that reason is the end-all, be-all, that faith in reason is what we need to follow if we're going to live a good life or make meaning of it. But the Romantics were all about this inner quest, this romantic dream for the sublime, for this connection with capital N nature that in which lives a God, not necessarily a Christian God, though they're not mutually exclusive. And so we have to do all we can to interact with this God, to channel it, to understand its meaning, to experience the sublime. Friedrich Schiller, a German romantic, wrote that the capacity to feel the sublime is one of the most glorious dispositions in human nature. And Romantic poets consistently tried to demonstrate that. In 1796, Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote a poem called The Aeolian Harp, and it encapsulates this idea in a pretty clear way. Let's read it. He says, "Oh, the one life within us and abroad, which meets all motion and becomes its soul, a light in sound, a sound like power in light, rhythm and all thought and joyance everywhere. Methinks it should have been impossible to not love all things in a world so filled, where the breeze warbles and the mute still air is music, slumbering in her instrument." Coleridge perfectly encapsulates this feeling, right? Joyance everywhere, rhythm in all thought. How could you not love this beautiful world that we're in, right? But then the modernists are no longer in this world. Methinks, say the modernists, look at this. Look at all around us. We are broken. This world is ruptured. The center is collapsing. There's no way to reach up if the ground beneath you is totally falling apart. So what do? Well, Ezra Pound tells us to make it new, to break the pentameter. The pentameter referring to the typical rhythm in which for example, all of Shakespeare's plays are written in iambic pentameter, and it's the most typical cadence in poetry. And so notice that violence in break the pentameter. There's a rupture. And so the modernists, right, they say that we have to acknowledge that we're in this moment, this difficult moment where the force of decay is really revealing itself, and that there's an improvisatory energy that's all around us, and that we have to embrace that, and we have to make this dark place not just a burial. We have to acknowledge the difficulty of it, but we have to make it a planting. We have to make it new. We have to make it matter. So we have more than a century between us and the modernists, but as you may have noted, our moments are not really dissimilar. So the modernists had industrialization. We have this rapid technological acceleration that's happened not only in the past 20 years from, for example, phones being only landlines and TVs being these huge boxes to all of this processing power fitting into our pockets, and all of the technology around us going from very difficult and clunky to totally accessible. But on top of that, more recently, of course, we have artificial intelligence and companies and billionaires trying to replace humans in a human world with robots, which seems totally futuristic and like Blade Runner and scary, And what do we do when all of our jobs are taken? And then on top of that, of course, we also have information overload and social fragmentation. Although it feels like we're totally and utterly globally connected, I can speak to somebody in Singapore or in Papua New Guinea today if I wanted to, because that's the power of the internet, which is an incredible power. It feels like we have no community, like we don't know our neighbor, like we're totally fragmented. And on top of that, we're internally fragmented because our attention spans are broken. Think about the second screen earlier. Think about iPad babies, and think about people in the youngest generation. And I'm not blaming them. We're all susceptible to the big companies preying on us. But it feels very palpable when, a 2-month-old can scroll on their phone, or not their phone, but their parents' phones like that. That's really scary, and that feels very alien to us. It feels like things are collapsing, right? We have a political instability in the collapse of institutions that used to be totally meaningful. The paradigm is shifting. The people who we used to think represented the pinnacle of society have been named doing horrors in the Epstein files. The politics around the world are shaking. The United States is in trillions, I think 30 trillions of dollars in debt with seemingly no way out. And it feels like this abyss is just getting bigger and bigger beneath us, and like we don't know what we can do about it. So while the modernist movement was about 100 years ago, what they were trying to convey, what it feels like to be a subject, to be conscious in a world that feels meaningless and fragmented, is totally relevant to us. The details of our moments, of course, are different. 100 years have passed. But the feelings that we're all left with are not so different at all. In fact, they're quite identical. And so looking back to what they wrote and how they processed their moment helps us understand our moment, because we were both at a precipice. And what the modernists did was they looked into the abyss. They looked down. They investigated in their writing, in their art, what it felt like to be a subject in this moment, what it felt like to be broken, what the repercussion, emotional, psychological, spiritual, linguistic was. And they conveyed that. And in order to do that, they had to use these new structures of writing, these new formats, these new ideas, because nothing before it was able to convey it. It wasn't rhythm and thought and joyance everywhere. It was things fall apart, the center cannot hold. And so what we can learn from them is how to take agency in our moment, how not to feel like just fodder for companies and billionaires, but maybe attempt to create newness, to use this moment and not just be passive observers, but really try to make sense of it and delve into and invest in humanity and human art. Because what else can we do, you know? The center is not holding. And so we need to look down, see the breakage, and then with our new words, with our new rhythms, with our new ideas and our new sounds that could never have come about 100 years ago when the modernists were happening, 200 years ago, 50 years ago even, we have to make it new. And we have to make it make sense for us. And we have to make meaning out of it. And that's what modernism can teach us. It can inspire us to really do that. We need a renaissance the way that they needed a renaissance, psychologically, linguistically, visually. They created an entire movement which has lasted in its relevance throughout a century. They have made amazing literature, amazing art, buildings that pique our interest every time we see them, every time we engage with them, because of how impactful they were and how new they were. And I would venture to say that reading modernist literature can inspire us all to do that. And I think that's some of the most powerful things we can do right now for ourselves in a world where it feels like we lack control over everything. But it's not everything. That one sliver that we have, that subjectivity, that self, that writing that you've never written before or you've thought about, or that painting that you've never painted, maybe that's what you need to feel yourself, to feel human in this moment, and to move forward and progress and not stagnate in the abyss of meaninglessness. Let's get into some suggestions for how you can start reading modernist literature. I would say let's start with poetry. Poetry is the easiest thing to start with because you can pick it up and put it down and you don't have to, follow characters and storylines. You should finish The Emperor of Ice Cream. It's only one more stanza. You should read The Second Coming by W.B. Yeats. You should... if you really want to get into the classic modernist text, you should read The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. The Wasteland and other writings, but specifically The Wasteland, is the classic modernist poem. It's full of fragmented images, different registers, many illusions, and that can really help you situate into the modernist moment. Other poetry that you can think about, you can read some Ezra Pound in a Station of the Metro, only 2 lines, an imagist poem. You can read To Whistler American, which is an ode. It's almost an ekphrastic poem to a painting. You can also read A Pact. It's an allusion to his romantic predecessor, Walt Whitman. Mina Loy has some great poems like Parturition, Brancusi's Golden Bird, which is another ekphrastic one, H.D. You can also read William Carlos Williams, some wonderful poems by him. This is just to say, The Red Wheelbarrow, which maybe you read in high school, that really short poem. And one of my favorites is Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. And then if you want to get into some short prose, The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka is an amazing place to start. It's German. If you can read German, obviously reading it in the first language is always better, but there are some good translations out there. The Metamorphosis is about a guy who wakes up and is a bug, and the questions of what is the self, who defines the self, what is the difference and relationship between internality and externality are right there at the forefront. You can also go for some Borges. Jorge Luis Borges is one of my all-time favorite writers. There's somewhere between a poem and a short prose piece is Borges and I. You can also pick up his collection Ficciones, or in English it's also called Ficciones, but it translates to fictions, which is a cheeky title. If you ever read it, you'll get it. And there's Toulon Akbar and Orbis Tertius. There's also Pierre Menard, author of Don Quixote, which is actually, I think, making directly fun of creatio ex nihilo, which is a Latin proverb or idea that you can create something out of nothing, which the Romantics loved. And you can also go for some Hemingway. We have In Our Time, collection of short stories. Some good ones are The 3-Day Blow, The End of Something, The Doctor and the Doctor's Wife, Big Two-Hearted River, Part 1 and Part 2. Hemingway is all about the iceberg. So the story is up here, but really all the meaning and feeling are down there, and it's very palpable and yet very difficult to parse sometimes. It's great if you feel like that's what you're looking for. And then you have Clarice Lispector, she's a Brazilian author who wrote Chronicles or Chronicles, and they are great. Love is a really good one. It's titled Love. And then there's a number of different ones. You can buy a collection of hers. Agua Viva is more of like a novella, but that's a good one too. And then if you want to get into some longer prose, I would say if you like stream of consciousness, or if you're not sure what that is, that's when all of the characters' feelings and emotions are right there on the page and you're just following that. Virginia Woolf, absolute master of stream of consciousness. Mrs. Dalloway is a good one. I think it's much easier than To the Lighthouse. I would say The Lighthouse is one of the most ultimate modernist challenges, which I'll talk about a little bit later. My favorite Faulkner is As I Lay Dying, but you could go for Light in August. You could go for The Sound and the Fury. Unless, again, you're looking for an ultimate challenge, don't start with Absalom unless you love totally feeling lost. The first sentence, I think, is the longest written sentence in English, in English literature. And it starts like that, and it just does not let up in difficulty. And it's wonderful, but it's also super difficult. I read it for a college class, and thank goodness I had my group of peers who were wonderful analysts and readers as well, because it's very difficult to parse through that one on your own. Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. The plot just totally keeps pushing you forward. It's, of course, amazingly beautifully written, and the language is beautiful. I think about Janie under the pear tree quite often, that beautiful image. And the characters, I mean, they're in my heart to this day. So if you're looking for they're all very moving, but a seriously moving one, I would say that's one of my favorites. And then if you like more surrealist prose, you have André Breton's Nadia, which is a super surrealist novella or novel originally in French that you could go for as well. For some ultimate modernist challenges, I have 3 recommendations. Number 1 is James Joyce's Ulysses. If you're going to read Ulysses, please read the Odyssey first. And that's not to stack difficulty upon difficulty. James Joyce, I think, actually recommended that his family read a children's version of it. What it does is give you the background necessary to understand it, because Ulysses, aka Odysseus, same character, goes by different names and different translations, is the protagonist of Ulysses. And if we don't have the backstory, how are we going to understand what the take is, right? So either read a summary, but just read the book. There's a lot of amazing translations out there. Emily Wilson's, Fitzgerald's, Latimore's, all really good ones. Different, though. And then you can also go for Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. To the Lighthouse is a good one to practice your stream of consciousness, kind of. The sentences are sometimes pages and pages and pages long. And so a way to help you break into that cadence is you can listen to an audiobook, and then the person who's narrating it, the voice actor, will help you understand the cadence of the sentence because it can be pretty difficult to follow one over many pages. But what I would recommend is if you do read it like that, which is a great way of getting into it, then you can also read it later at a different point in your life on your own, because then you will impose your own cadence on it and have a different relationship to the text. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who is famous for writing 100 Years of Solitude and Love in the Time of Cholera, wrote The Autumn of the Patriarch, which is about a dictator who in a Caribbean country who decides to sell the sea. That's a really wonderful, excellent one, but the last chapter, which is maybe 30, 40 pages, is all one sentence. So be prepared for that if you're going to go into that one. Last but not least, we have William Faulkner, Absalom. Like I said, pretty difficult text and still wonderful though. But these are my ultimate modernist challenges. And if you made it this far, thank you very much for your time and your attention. I would love to hear your thoughts on the comparisons between modernist times and today's times. If you have any other ways that you feel the center is collapsing, if you have any other suggestions for modernist texts. Yeah.